Welcome back. In this video, we shall talk about function scopes in JavaScript. In JavaScript, there are two scopes known as the global scope and the local scope. To make these easily understood, let me say the global scope is outside a function and the local scope is inside a function. A global variable exists outside a function, which is the global scope, and a local variable exists inside a function, which is the local scope. Or you can understand it this way: the global scope is the location where you can find global variables, and the local scope is the location where you can find local variables. The local scope is always inside a function. So inside a function is the location where you can find local variables, and outside the function, which is the global scope, is the location where you can find global variables. Let's look at an example. Let's say I have a variable of price set to 567, and I have a variable of name set to John. Now let me create a function with a name of my function with no arguments, and I'll say var location, set that to Nigeria, and I'll say var name, set that to migrant solutions. Now let me return name. Now let me explain this. These two variables are global variables because they exist in the global scope, which is outside the function. And these two variables, location and name, are local variables because they exist in a local scope, which is inside a function. Now the difference between these two sets of variables is that the global variables can be accessed by any function in our code, and the local variable cannot be accessed anywhere outside the function it belongs to. Now let's demonstrate this. Let's console.log name. Let's say console.log name. As you can see, John is being returned to us, and that's because our console.log cannot go inside our function to access the name variable there. It can only access the name variable in the global scope. But if I want the name in the local scope, which is migrant solutions, to be returned, I would call the function here by saying my function. And as you know, in our function we returned name. So when I run my code, you'd see I now have migrant solutions returned to me. To explain further, I can access the global variable in my function by taking this out. Let's say I take this out and I just return name without setting any value to a variable of name in my function. If I run my code, you would see I'm giving John. John is being returned to me because the return statement in my function that returns name can actually access the name variable that exists in the global scope. But if I say I set my name to migrant solutions and I come here and I set the name variable to a null value, to nothing, and I console.log name, let's run our code to see what we have. You can see I'm being given an empty value, which means the name variable here could not access the value of name variable here, which is migrant solutions. But when I had no variable of name set here and I just returned name in my function, it was able to access the name value in the global scope. So that's the difference between the local scope variables and the global scope variables. Before we jump into the next video, let's talk about return statement in JavaScript. A return statement in JavaScript is used for two things. Firstly, it is used to end the execution of a function, and secondly, it is used to return a particular value from a function like what we have here. I am returning just the value of name. If you notice, name is not the only variable there, but I wish to return just name from the whole function. So let's say I have another variable called sum is equal to location and name, and I run my code by calling my function. You see that I still have migrant solutions returned to me because I am returning only the name variable from my function. So I may choose to return sum. Let's run our code to see what we have. As you can see, we have Nigeria migrant solutions. So let's fix the spacing here and run our code again. You can see we have Nigeria migrant solutions, and that's what the return statement is being used for. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to share.